Hey there, how's it going? I try to make devlogs or some kind of documentation on my projects for mostly two reasons. There are a good number of people here on YouTube that genuinely seem to like them, and the reason I started making them in the first place is I use the devlogs as a chronicle of a thing that I made and a postmortem to analyze the decisions that I chose. I really like this process, and it helps me finalize the game in my mind. I've participated in a lot of game jams over the last couple of years, and I wasn't making devlogs from the start, so there's a handful of games that I've made that have never gotten this treatment. But after making the devlog about my challenge games a few weeks back, I've wanted to dust off some of my old stuff and finally really dig in and analyze them. But before we get into that, I'd like to thank the sponsor of this video, Core. Core is the new free game creation platform that lets you build, publish, and play games. It's an amazing platform to quickly get started designing and building experiences for other players to enjoy. Especially if you want to create a 3D multiplayer game without the hassle. Simply pick a framework and start building your own games right away using thousands of free high-quality music, sound, and art assets. All of it with no coding required. But if you really want to dig into it, Core lets you create your own game logic using Lua. You can build games from scratch or remix and reimagine content shared by other creators. And when it's time to publish, your game will go live on the Core platform with the click of a button. Starting September 16th, Core is teaming up with the Global Game Jam for an all-new jamming experience. Utilize Core to form unique worlds for players to explore and enjoy. Plus, just by finishing and sharing your game, Core will be working with the Global Game Jam to make sure that your jam site gets $100. A big thank you to Core for supporting this channel and allowing me to make more content for all of you to enjoy. Core is completely free with plenty of resources to get started, so be sure to check it out by clicking the link in the description. Let's look into the games we're going to check out today. Since these were made a little while ago, I won't go into as much detail on the making of, and I will mostly be focusing on the decisions that I made and what it taught me. I feel that this process is crucial for being a better designer. Today we're going to take a look at two games that I made early in my game jam addiction. If you don't know, Ludum Dare is one of the largest online game-making challenges that happens every April and October. During the competition, there are two ways to participate, either the Jam or the Compo, also known as Classic. If you enter the Jam, you get the theme and you have 72 hours to make a game. You can do this alone or as part of a team, and use assets that you have the legal rights to use. If you enter the Compo, however, you get the theme and you only have 48 hours to make your game. You must work alone as well as create all art and sound assets along with the game in that 48 hours. You're also required to provide your source code at the end. I've done each of these once, so like I did in real life, let's start with the Jam. This was for Ludum Dare 43, which took place November 30th through December 3rd, 2018. And the theme was Sacrifices Must Be Made. I thought it would be clever to make a game where you started out strong and became weaker through sacrifices as the game went on. The player begins the game with full marks in three stats: health, speed, and strength. They would play through a level, and after finishing it, a wizard would force them to drink a potion that would take away a point in one of the three stats. And only after enough sacrifices would the player be able to fight the wizard themselves. I was playing a lot of Binding of Isaac at the time, so the gameplay is fairly similar, except I gave the player a tiny attack radius, and I'm not entirely sure why now. Looking back, I would have liked to have made this longer. The player must kill all the dangers on each level before the exit door will open. And if you die, you go all the way back to the beginning, you know, like in the Binding of Isaac. Roguelike. Okay, let's rip the bandage off. I don't think this is a good game, and I would do things drastically different now. But I am really glad that I made it, because it taught me a ton of the fundamental game design concepts that I still follow to this day. Let's start with art. I made all of the art except for the boss wizard. That was made by Warren Clark. I used their asset off of Itch because I ran out of time. I had never made a top-down 4-direction sprite before, and I don't think I have since, actually. When the player is facing right or left, you can just mirror the sprite, which is great to save time, especially when you're on a deadline like in a game jam. But unfortunately, there's not really that same kind of trick for up and down. Each direction needs to have its own set of animations created and implemented. This is why the other enemies don't have an up or down state, and some of them don't even move. A big issue that I remember from this jam was that I spent way too long on the art and just barely finished the game in time. Each level layout was exactly the same, just with different enemy placements. I required the player to make 7 sacrifices, which meant playing through the same level layout 7 times. So that's what the game was. By the way, if you've played the game on my itch page, you may be confused. I updated the game as part of another game jam that was all about fixing up a previous game, so that's why the one that you see on the itch page has the remix title on it. Looking back, I think the whole game concept was flawed from the start. I thought I was being clever with the whole, you start strong and you become weaker as you go. You know, it's a whole subversion of normal video game tropes. Look how smart I am. But yeah, it turns out the tropes are there for a reason. People don't want to become weaker as they play. It's just not very fun. Even if a game has no progression system, the player getting better at the game itself is what forms the progress. From my observations, people don't like to feel like they aren't getting better, or even less desirable, getting worse. Then you top it off with a roguelike style die and you go all the way back to the start deaths, and yeah, it's just not very player friendly. A couple weeks after making Pick Your Poison, I joined the Optical Jam, which was all about taking a previous Game Jam game and fixing things that you didn't have time for originally. The changes I chose to make were to update the level layouts and add extra lives. I added in the old school 3-life system, where if you die and you have a life, you get to keep going. If you die and you don't have any, then you game over and go back to the beginning then. In retrospect, I still don't like this change. It's more of a move in the right direction, but I was still thinking of games like they were when I was a kid and making things NES hard. I grew up with that style of game, so I have a nostalgia for that difficulty, but most people really don't anymore, and it's really not that fun of a mechanic. If I were to update this game now, I probably wouldn't, because I no longer care for the entire core mechanic. I don't want my players to feel like they're getting weaker. But if I have to give a list of should-have-dones, I'd say not forcing the player back to the start, obviously. I would have made the attack have a much better range. I would have required less sacrifices. 7 is a lot, 3 probably would have been better. And also not required killing every enemy on every floor. I would rather add a key that the player would grab, or make one of the enemies glowing a different color that you would know to go and defeat to get the key from. And my final thoughts, it's a game I appreciate that I made because of how much I learned from it. A good amount of the advice that I give out and follow myself to this day, I learned because I did it wrong in this game. So it holds a special place in my heart, although I still don't think it's a very good game. About a half a year later, I tried my hand at Ludum Dare again, but this time I decided I wanted to go for the compo. And again, compo is 48 hours, one developer makes everything. I actually really wanted to do compo for Pick Your Poison, but I ran out of time and needed the extra day and public resources. This time, the theme was your life is currency. I was determined not to overscope myself this time. No boss fight, only one level. The concept was that a spaceship had to make an emergency landing on a planet. The crew is sick and the ship is out of energy. The player plays as a drone that they've sent out to gather resources. But the twist that pulls it into the theme is that you and the ship both use the same energy. So you can give the ship as much energy as you want before going out to get more, but you need to be careful to leave enough for yourself. You collect energy by extracting pink rocks. Taking damage will increase your damage meter, and the higher your damage is, the more energy you'll use up as you move around. All of your damage is repaired when you return to the ship. If the ship runs out of fuel, the crew members will start to die. If they all die, you lose. However, in reality, everyone starts by adding energy to the ship, so they never see this message. I have a lot of mixed feelings looking back on this game. Everything feels like it's just almost there. 48 hours alone creating everything is pretty rough. I do game jams of varying lengths alone all the time, and it's not usually an issue, but I rarely make my own sounds and music. So that means that I couldn't put my normal amount of attention into this game that I would. This game suffered from just needing to be a bit more pretty much everywhere. The character is adorable, but the bees and the ship are pretty meh, if not just bad. The terrain is a bit too strong, and the background is a bit too boring. The map layout feels very samey because there's just not a whole lot of variation in the world. It would help if as you got lower the terrain changed or you came across different enemies, but unfortunately, just no time for that. I am pleased to see that even back then, I started thinking a little bit more about the players by adding a compass. That way, there was never any question about which way you had to go to get back to your ship. There's no minimap, so you'll have to find your own way. Mostly there's no minimap because I didn't know how to make one, but the compass does help a lot. I had originally planned to have the crew's life support be on its own reservoir that you had to fill up, similar to the ship and the drone. But I ran out of time and just tied it in with the ship, which is why it became so missable. Everything about this game is just almost there. I haven't had the desire to actually go back and make any updates to this game, but making this video is starting to make me think it might be worth an update. Maybe someday, it depends if people like it. The game itself is fun for a couple of minutes, but it goes on for many more minutes past that. So, like I said, it's almost there. I hope you've enjoyed this look at my past Ludum Dare entries as much as I've enjoyed going back and kind of digging into them again. There really were a few things about these games that I had completely forgotten until looking into them for this. If you haven't looked at some of your old projects recently, I'd suggest taking some time and giving them a run through. Try to remember why you did what you did and what you think those decisions should be now. I find it to be a fun design exercise, and I would recommend it. Thank you all very much for watching. I'd like to give an extra special shout out to my patrons, especially Abishon, Adam Edwards, David Scott, Nightfall, Liam Sorta, MLK, Nezzer Salim, Ragnabro, Scott Hansen, Straight Up Gruntled, and Soapy Gnome. You are all awesome people, and I truly appreciate the support. And a final thank you to the sponsor of this video, Core. Don't forget to check them out. It's completely free. Just click the link in the description. If you'd like to play these or any of my other games, you can visit vimlark.itch.io. To get in contact with me, you can stop by my Twitch stream, message me on Twitter, or join the Discord with a lot of other really cool people. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing, and I will talk with you next time. Have a good one. Later.